You know, we've got to stop meeting like this. It's great to see all of you here. More loud? Is that more better? Okay. Again, it's a pleasure, not a pleasure to have you all here. Glad to see you came out to pay your respects to our Uncle Jim Minear. That's what he liked to be called, Uncle Jim. He was my neighbor on Old Pirate Lane, fellow flyer, and a close friend for the last 15 years. Move back here where I can get out of the feedback. I knew Jim well, but there was a lot about him I'm just learning. That is where I'm coming from and sharing with you tonight. Does this sound okay?
Yes.
All right.
Perfect.
I hope you will share your experiences when I'm finished. There's several words that describe Uncle Jim. First word is misunderstood. I want to do what I can to set the record straight about Jim. He was above all a loyal American patriot, and he was one of the good guys. Jim was misunderstood by his acquaintances, loved by those who knew him well, and hated by his enemies. He was irreverent. Jim was irreverent both to society and to organized religion. So we won't have a prayer tonight. Adventurous. Jim was adventurous. His exploits could fill a book, and they may just do that one day soon. Intelligent. Jim was one of the most intelligent men I have known. His mind was his greatest asset. Humorous. We all knew Jim's extremely sharp wit and his great ability. To hand out friendly insults. Most of us will miss him most for this. And he was kind-hearted. We all knew Jim's only his friends and family knew that Jim was too soft-hearted to refuse a stray animal. He even adopted a few stray humans. There are many other single words that describe Jim, but I will let you supply those words. Let me now tell you some of what I know of Jim's life. James Perry Minear. Some would say that it seems appropriate that Jim started life in Leavenworth. Leavenworth, Kansas, that is. He was born 8th of March, 1928, or 1927 if you see his Navy records. Jim's family, which included 8 older brothers and sisters, moved to Longview, Washington when he was 8 years old. As a boy, Jim experimented with electronics and earned money fixing radios for friends and neighbors. At the age of 16, Jim ran away from home. He was soon arrested for vagrancy in Tillamook, Oregon. There he set fire to the mattress in his cell. Does that sound like Jim? Once Jim returned home, his daddy cut off Jim's corner of the dinner table, broke Jim's plate, and enlisted Jim in the Navy. Of course, he had to lie about his age, and that's part of the confusion about Jim. Was he 61 or was he 62? But in 1944, the Navy wasn't so fussy. Jim became an aviation electronics technician, a brand new field in the Navy. He did so well that the Navy had to wait until he was officially 21, but really 20, to promote him to Chief Petty Officer. At that time, he was the youngest chief in the U.S. Navy. Jim went on to do pioneering work with the first atom bomb-carrying airplane to be launched from an aircraft carrier in the Navy. He left the Navy after 10 years' service in search of greater opportunities. North American Aviation, Autonetics Division was Jim's next challenge. There he wrote a pioneering theoretical treatise called A New Look at Terrain Avoidance. This was the beginnings of terrain-following radar, which is used today on our fighters and penetration bombers. Jim learned to fly in Corpus Christi, Texas in July 1947. where the challenge was not money for renting an airplane, but being able to scrape up enough money for gas to get to the airport. He crashed a J3 Cub into a preacher's greenhouse one Sunday morning and broke every window. The preacher lost his religion that morning. Jim never had any religion. Jim was married May 11, 1946 to Marion. Everybody said it wouldn't last 6 weeks. That was 43 years this May. Jim went on to greater challenges. 1967, he got a patent for the moving message sign. You know, the kind you see on the Goodyear blimp. That's his. Then 1974, he was issued a patent on an automatic battery charger, the kind that you and I buy today. He supplied the electronics modules for those units to Shower and to Sears and Roebuck for several years. Of course, he got started on that by being resourceful. He was walking through a scrapyard one day and found 50 barrels of diodes, little electronic devices that don't mean much to most people. He bought them for $50 a barrel, hauled them home and stored them in the living room. What else do you do when you have 6 kids? Where else do you put stuff? He then worked around those parts he had got for next to nothing, designed this electronic circuit for an automatic battery charger. Got the patent on it, made a good income off of those 17 barrels of diodes for a number of years. 1976, he got another patent that conserved battery life in a little bug sprayer. Maybe you remember these about 15 years ago. That every 5 to 15 minutes they would put out a squirt of either room deodorant or insecticide. Of course, he was shut down by that by our people at UC Irvine. Among other things, he had a TV repair business. He'd build a light show for cars that was hooked to the sound. He was into scrap electronics, reclaiming the gold off of electronics components when the price of gold ran up. And he even invented a rat chaser, electronic rat chaser. It didn't work, but it sold well. The guy bought and sold. You've seen all the airplanes, he said. One time he had a 137-foot ship called the Explorer. Beautiful wooden ship. After he sold that, he had a 198-foot ship called the Inaqua, an old banana boat. He traded that for an interest in a DC-3. He owned the DC-3, but he just ended up with a bunch of receipts from that and something like, I don't want to talk about it. He eventually got his money. Then there was the famous Bonanza that was hidden from hangar to hangar over the years. But of all of his accomplishments, Jim was most proud of his 6 children who are here tonight. With this, I would like to invite any of you to get up and tell us about Jim.
Rona, and we've been longtime neighbors of the Minear family. We all moved onto the street about the same time when our children were small, and through the years we've gotten to know the family very well and become very close with them. I love to work in my yard, and since my yard happens to be the access to the airport, I often saw Jim coming through on his bicycle. It is so much ingrained in my mind that even today, when I was outside and around, I expected him to go by. I never knew a person that had a sharper wit and had a tougher facade, but that had a bigger heart and was a finer person. And I honor his memory, and I honor his family. And I would join any of you that would like to share your remembrances of Jim to come now, share for a moment.
I can share with you a little anecdote about my neighbor Jim Minear. I was over on the airport at Long Beach one time and I found a Beechcraft, G-18S Twin Beach, and I was quite taken by this aircraft, so I went over to get Jim, and he came over and with the help of some of his friends, got that plane in shape for me, and together we owned and operated that plane for several months. I had a couple spare engines that came along with the plane, and when Jim looked at these, he said, well, these are, there's a problem with these engines. So he persuaded me to go back to the people who sold me the plane and give me half my money back, which I had paid for the plane. So I ended up paying $10,000 for this plane. Then he found a buyer for me at $50,000, and so that was a pretty nice deal. He flew the plane back to the East Coast for the guy and didn't charge him too much, only $5,000. The two engines that I got with the plane turned out to be good after all. He sold those. He often told me how much money he made on those and gave me many thanks for that. I said he ought to share some of that with me, but another deal he was persuaded me to participate in was buying lamps, these lamps that hang from the ceiling with a fan on them. And another deal he talked me into was, let's see, one day he told me he had a machine that would make money. You put the money into this machine and you crank this handle, and whatever you put in, you get out twice whatever you put in. I said I wasn't interested in this machine, that he ought to give this one to his son-in-law to be, which he didn't do. Well, there's a few other stories I can tell you about Jim. I got involved with several deals with him, and they all turned out pretty good. So this was a very nice relationship. It was one that was, as you have probably experienced, had its ups and downs. And Jim and I were talking one time and said that, well, you know, even with our spouse, we don't always get along 100% of the time, so it's understandable that we're not going to get along with each other 100% of the time. But we had many good times together. The day he went to the hospital, we had breakfast together, and he had a very good sense of humor. He said that morning that if he was going to leave this world, that one last thing he'd like to do is take his plane up and take some of his friends with on a one-way flight. He said he was going to draw up a list of everybody he wanted to invite on this flight, and his only regret was that his plane could only carry 5 other people beside himself. So he was very witty and very good, had a very good sense of humor, and it was a pleasure to know and be acquainted with Jim. I'll turn this mic over to anybody else that might want to say anything about their relationship with Jim Minear. I know a lot of you had experiences with him. Anybody else like to say anything about Jim? Okay.
You know, Jim was a good aviator, and he used to bring his birds in and out of here. Most twin pilots wouldn't do that. But Jim never had any problems, and as a matter of fact, he was admired greatly by his ability to do that. I remember one morning, I was up flying, and I heard Jim call from the runway. He had an engine out on the other Aztec, the one that's red now. And just about the time Jim's on short final way, some old boy pulled out in front of him, and Jim had to do a go-around. Closer? Had to do a go-around on one engine and manage it, and came in and landed. So Jim had a lot of good flying ability. Jim was also generous with his airplanes, and a lot of people here, a lot of Meadowlark pilots flew with him, and some learned some twin training and got some twin flying time from him. And I remember one morning, my girlfriend's mom and dad wanted to ride in the Big Red Bird, and we called him, and he stopped and got him aboard and gave him a ride. So Jim was like has been mentioned before, underneath that facade, sometimes it seemed a little hard maybe. There was really a big heart. Thank you.
You're speaking of Jim and his generosity. I first met Jim about 1974, 75 out here at the airport when a lot of the aviators would come out and have coffee in the morning. And at that time, my dad, who was an old-time aviation pioneer, moved down to Huntington Beach and would come out to Meadowlark and chat with some of the flyers. And Jim traveled some, went down to the Grand Caymans, in which, if you always noticed Jim, he was always on his bicycle, and he always had a nice stogie in his mouth. And he always had some nice cigars from the Grand Cayman or some Havanas, and occasionally he'd give my pop one. And then some days my dad wouldn't be out here and I'd see Jim. I go, well, what's going on, Jim? Nice day? And he says, oh yeah, real nice, but here's a couple Havanas for your pop, because he knew how much my dad enjoyed those good cigars, and it showed his sincere generosity of giving. He always knew my dad enjoyed the cigars, and it was always a pleasure to see Jim at the airport.
Step up. Dr. Vinn, one of the old pirates.
You know, I'm kind of a recent friend of Jim's, and I probably, even though he's my neighbor, I didn't know him as well as me, you did, but last night I was sharing with his family my favorite Jim Minear story. Is any of Harry Durian's family here tonight? Harry lives right across the street from us, and he's a collector of interesting objects, kind of different from what Jim collects. But his kids kind of collected some interesting dogs, kind of vicious, and we were all kind of tired of these dogs, including Jim. And Jim used to pedal slowly up and down the street on his bicycle. And as those dogs got older, they got bolder and bolder, and they get further and further out in the street, and they get bark more and more. And you got to where occasionally they try to grab your pants leg or whatever when you were going down the street. And Jim got pretty tired of this, since he was going up and down the street all the time. And one day I was standing out in front of the house. Here came Jim on the bike, and there came the dog after Jim, and I could see Jim shaking his leg with the dog's foot on his leg, and trying to get something out of his back pocket. And finally he got the dog loose and kind of turned around in my driveway. I said, Jim, what's going on? That dog's happy. He says, I had my gun. I was trying to shoot him. It got stuck in my back pocket. I couldn't get it out of the pocket. So that's always going to be one of my favorite memories of Jim.
What Jim referred to affectionately as his 9mm camera. Who's next? Everybody tongue-tied? We've all got some good Jim jokes. Here comes... No way. One of the prettier pirates.
I'm Jovita Rosenblat, and I live next door to the Minears for the last, I can't keep track of the years, but they have been a terrific neighbors, all of them. At some point, I have lived on Graham Street for about 22 years now. And when the street got very busy, I wanted to move and get out of the place. My daughter, Lisa, and Robbie were probably about 10, 11 at the time. They said, Mom, if we can't take the Minears with us, we're not moving. And that was it. And another favorite story of Jim is I finally got my citizenship, and I had to vote for the first time on a presidential election. And I registered, and I ran over to the Minears, and I told them. And Jim gave me the hardest time. He just could not understand how a Filipino girl could register as a Democrat. You know, when Ralph said something about being a super patriot and his conservative, really conservative political ideas. Every now and then he'd still dig it up when he saw me. And I have to answer him at some time why I registered a Democrat. I never gave him the answer, I just ran away from him. Okay, next.
You may have registered a Democrat, but he bragged that he never registered. He also never had a driver's license. You registered once. Which party? Voted for Goldwater. Everybody should quit after that one. And he didn't have a driver's license for the last 25 years, and his pilot's license was always in question. You know, one night, maybe I can tell another little story here. One night, Jim and Marion were at our house for dinner. This was several years ago. And, you know, sometimes Jim would flash a roll of bills like this, right? Put it back in his pocket. Of course, it had the $100 bill on the outside. Well, that night, it was in the privacy of our house. Rona grabs that roll of money, starts counting it. It's $40,000. She thought it was 100 with a bunch of ones inside. Things were chicken or feathers with the Minears, and it was always an adventure. But we have this roll of bills for Marion. It's not all hundreds, I'm afraid. That's from your friends at Meadowlark Airport. And the card, when you're up to reading it. These two pictures were taken very recently by a staff photographer from the LA Times. Couldn't find nicer pictures. These are part of for the family. Anything else we can add? Rona?
Advertising.
In closing our sharing tonight, there's a poem. There's a poem that our flight instructor, Troy Burris, who was also a dear friend of Jim's, first gave to me when I was learning to fly in 1974 here at Meadowlark. And I think that any of us who have experienced flight and love it truly can say that this is what they felt, and I'd like to share it with you. Oh, I have slipped the surly bonds of earth and danced the skies on laughter-silvered wings. Sunward I've climbed and joined the tumbling mirth of sun-split clouds, and done 100 things you have not dreamed of, wheeled and soared and swung high in the sunlit silence. Hovering there, I've chased the shouting wind along and flung my eager craft through footless halls of air. Up, up, the long, delirious, burning blue, I've topped the windswept heights with easy grace, where never lark nor even eagle flew. And while, with silent, lifting mind, I've trod the high, untrespassed sanctity of space, put out my hand and touched the face of God. And Jim is with God now.
We'll leave the microphone here in case of any of you get your silver tongues loosened up after eating some food, having a drink in honor of Jim.
Well, this is Jim, as his friends and colleagues in aviation and elsewhere will remember him. Oh, there's a bit of a humorous side to him, and he'll be very sadly missed all around. And so here's your cameraman, Brian Cartier, signing off, and to you, Jim, wherever you are, happy landings.